Hi, this is Craig Stocks here for Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com, and we'd love to talk to you about hosting your telescope or an hourly rental on one of our telescopes. And there's still time to register for our Southwest Utah Astrophotography Masterclass. A little bit unusual. It'll be focusing on both Milky Way and deep sky astrophotography. Field work, working with remote telescopes overnight, and then post-processing instruction during the day. So check that out on our website. What I want to talk about today is a little bit of a departure, and rather than talking about the specifics of a single image, I'm going to talk more generally about tone, contrast, dynamic range, bit depth, and then eventually color, and ultimately how that affects some of the decisions we make as we process our astro images. So when we look at an image, and I think it's true of pretty much any image, it's made up of light and dark and color and shapes. And in fact, rather well-known photographer by the name of Jay Mizell wrote a book and has talked about the three components of an image, which he breaks down as to light, gesture, and color. And light and color are probably pretty obvious, and I won't talk much about gesture other than to point out that gesture really is a component of astro images. If we think about pictures of people, gesture is a pretty obvious concept, and even without color, when there's people in the image, gesture is pretty obvious. But when you don't have people, you still have gesture. A picture of a flower, but if we look at the implied lines and the movement of the stems and the leaves, and even the shape of the vase here, or vase, depending on its price, that would be gesture in an inanimate object. And that's true in almost any image that has something other than just a solid color. You're going to have various lines, and those lines, as they move through the image, will create a form of a gesture. And even in an astro image, we look at there's kind of an implied line here, there's lines here from this dark nebula, there's a line here where the hydrogen is overlaying the oxygen in the background. So there are lots of gestures in this image. But let's focus a little bit more on tone, color, contrast, bit depth. And for that, I'm just going to close this image for now. Let's look at a simple grayscale. And let's kind of focus a little bit on tone first of all, and bit depth. We can look at this image and it goes from pure black on the left hand side to pure white on the right hand side. And right now I have it displayed against a medium gray background so that we can see more or less the entire image. That if I were to put this on a black background, you would see that in fact it just blends right into the black on the left hand side. If I put it on a white background, it blends into the white on the right hand side. So that just kind of demonstrates this goes from pure black to pure white. Now whatever device you're watching it on, whether it's a tablet, a computer monitor, your phone, whatever, what this black is going to represent is the blackest point that your device is capable of. And since you're looking at it on an RGB image, it's displaying light, and black is just the absence of light. And so whatever device you're using, this black is going to be the blackest black that it can display. And likewise, on the white side, it's going to be the whitest white your device can display. If we print this on paper, then it's just the opposite. Then the white will be the bright white, or whatever color the paper or aluminum or whatever the substrate is, without any ink applied to it. And black will be subtracting white from that substrate, and ultimately will be however black the ink is. And the blackness of the ink will determine how dark the black is. In photography terms, the output dynamic range will tend to be about 7 to 8 stops of range, where each stop is a doubling of the brightness or intensity. And that's really about all we get to work with. The world has a lot more dynamic range than that. Part of the challenge of photography is how do we compress the dynamic range of the world into a dynamic range that we can put on paper or display on a monitor. So we've already said that this is the blackest black we can have and the whitest white we can have. Well, what if we have more bits or more bit depth? In the 8-bit world, which is what we use for most talking purposes, let me turn on the right layer here, we talk in terms of black being 0 and white being 255, because 255 is the largest number you can express in an 8-bit number. So in an 8-bit world, we have 256 discrete brightness levels ranging from 0 to 255. If instead I have a 16-bit image, black is still 0, white is now 65,535, that's the largest number you can express with 16 bits, but it's not any brighter. Having 65,535 in a 16-bit image doesn't make the white any brighter. It's still limited by the brightness of your monitor or the whiteness of a piece of paper. And even with a 32-bit image, all we're doing is adding more variations, more numbers in between, more discrete levels. Now there's going to be over 2 billion discrete levels of brightness between 0 and 2,147,000,000 and so forth. But white is still going to be the brightest white the monitor can display. Black is still going to be the blackest black the monitor can display, which is the absence of any light being displayed. The only difference is the number of discrete values between 0 and the maximum. And for talking purposes, we tend to talk in terms of 8-bit numbers from 0 to 255, even though your images that come out of the computer are probably closer to 16-bit files. And when you're working with them in PixInsight or somewhere, you may actually be working at a 32-bit level, even though you're starting with just 16 bits of precision. So what do those levels buy us? If it doesn't make the black any blacker or the white any whiter, we can't display the whole dynamic range from bright sunlight to a black cat in a coal mine in one image. We have to choose the range that we want to work with, and that's true of any image. What the levels buy for us is more discrete values in between, and that can be important, especially in astro images where we're stretching and trying to pull a lot of detail out of this dark area. And so let's look at what happens. Here we have our full 256 layers or discrete values, and it probably looks like a fairly smooth transition or gradation to you. It will depend a little bit on your monitor. Your monitor may have some banding artifacts, so there may be some stripes in here, and that would be a function of your monitor more so than my software or my display. You're not actually seeing my display, you're seeing the numbers I'm displaying on your monitor. But what happens if we break this down into fewer discrete values? The ultimate would be if we just broke it down into 2 values, black and white. Still, black is no blacker and white is no whiter. There's just nothing in between pure black and pure white. So right now we're looking at this with 2. You can see the number perhaps up here in this post-rise adjustment layer. We're dividing this gradient into 2 levels. If I divide it into 3 levels, well, now we have black, white, and we have a medium gray in the middle. So we get 3 discrete levels. 4 would give us 4 discrete levels. 5 would give us 5 discrete levels. And we can keep increasing the number of levels, and eventually we'll get to the point where there will be such little difference between the layers that our eyes will no longer perceive a difference, and it'll start to appear smooth. And the general consensus is that by the time you get to 255 discrete layers, our eyes can no longer visibly discern those individual stripes, that they are so close together we can't discern a difference. Somewhere between 255 and 128, depending on your monitor, your eyes, and so forth, you'll really begin to see those stripes. If I zoom in, there is around 100, there's 118, 125. So at some point they will start to really blend together and you won't see the variation anymore. And in order to have a smooth image, we need to be to the point where there are enough levels of gray that our eyes don't see the bands or the differences in between. So 255 is generally enough, and in fact most output is going to be at 8-bit or 255 discrete levels of darkness. That's true for an inkjet printer. That's going to be true for something you send off to be printed. That's mostly true for computer displays, that if you look at the level or the range from black to white, that's really about all you get. So we have to work within that pure black to pure white. Let's look at some discrete levels. So here at the bottom we have 256 levels of brightness, and we know that that's going to appear generally smooth. If I cut that down to 64 levels, now you can really start to see the banding. I didn't include 128 because the difference was pretty subtle, and I know YouTube is going to kind of have its way with the video and reduce it even more. But 64, you should be able to see the vertical bars separating the different levels. At 32, it becomes even more obvious, and if you zoom in, you can see a nice relationship here, that this one level at 32-bit becomes 2 levels at 64-bit, and it would become 8 levels down here at 256, where we can no longer see the individual steps. If we break it into 16, same pattern, but even more. And if we go up to 8, even more. We can see this gets split into 2, each one of these is split into 2, and so forth. So I can't show you easily the difference between 16-bit and 32-bit. I can show you the difference between 3-bit, 4-bit, 5-bit at these lower levels. And if I zoom back out a little bit, I want you to notice something interesting that's happening over here at the dark area. When we start at the very coarsest at 8 levels, we have this one black block here on the left. As we add more bit depth, more gradations between pure black and pure white, we start to see a breakdown of, it's not just pure black, it's now dark gray and pure black. If we break it down again, we get 3 levels of gray and then black, and so on down. So what's happening when you have more bit depth, 16-bit instead of 8-bit or 32-bit instead of 16-bit, is you have a lot more variations available to you, and that's especially important to us at the very dark end of the spectrum. And in fact, if I put a little stretch on this image, if I add a levels adjustment and just brighten the midtones, it becomes even more obvious what's happening is we're beginning to stretch the bright levels, and as long as we have enough discrete values, then we get fairly smooth tones. But you can see here, even with 256, once I start stretching it, it very quickly starts banding down here in the darker colors. If this were a 16-bit, this would still appear very smooth. At 32-bit, it would really be smooth. But as soon as we give up bit depth, we start giving up levels, and we start getting posterization, banding, noise becomes much more apparent, and so forth. So that's what's happening to our tones as we go from pure black to pure white across the spectrum, and that's going to be true of any image. A color image is really made up of 3 black and white images. Most of us are working with RGB color, and in RGB color you have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And each of those channels you can think of as being just a black and white gradient or black and white image of just the reds, just the greens, and just the blues. And then when you combine them, red, green, and blue combine to give us all the colors of the rainbow. So if we look at this in terms of color, and let's start with just red. So before we were looking at a gradient that went from pure black to pure white. When we add color to the mix, it goes from pure black to pure red. And just for fun, let's break this down into just 2 levels, and we have just black and just red. And we would see the same relationship as we add the number of levels, and when we get up to 256 discrete levels of black to red, we no longer see the banding, that our eyes begin to perceive that as a smooth, continuous tone. If we throw other colors into the mix, this is just a red gradient. We can also add a green gradient, or we could add a blue gradient. And I've got these rotated 60 degrees to each other for a reason, because if I turn on all 3, now we get all the colors of the rainbow that can be displayed in this color space, which is the sRGB color space if you're curious. These are the colors that we get when we mix black to red, black to green, and black to blue. So those are all the colors. Now we only have 256 discrete values going from pure blue to pure black, and red and green likewise. But when we start to mix red, green, and blue, you get more colors. So for instance, if we go to just the 2 level, what was just pure black and pure white, you can see now we actually have 6 different colors that we're getting out of pure black and pure blue, black and green, black and red. And in the center you have a little bit of overlap where the colors all even out, and it comes out just a pure gray or a pure white depending on the brightness level. But as we increase the number of levels, we'll see that the number of colors go up, but we always are going to have more colors available to us in a color image than we do in just a pure black and white image. And that's because the colors interact with one another and create more possible variations of red, green, and blue than if you just have black and white. So that's a little bit about color. Each color, as I said, you have the option of that color channel going from pure black to pure whatever color it is, red, green, or blue. When we actually put that together into an image, and let's look at an image in grayscale. So this happens to be the oxygen data from the WR134 Wolf-Rayet star region, and I have the stars turned off right now. So that's the oxygen layer, and this is the hydrogen alpha layer. And those might look pretty good to you, but if we look at them relative to, and this is a good trick to use, if you look at them relative to the background, if I make the background black, we can see, well, really I don't have anything in this image that's pure black, and likewise I don't have anything that's even close to pure white. So if I make these color images, which if you've seen my tutorials before, you know the way I make these a color image is I will go into the oxygen layer in this case, and to get an HOO image I want the oxygen to be just green and blue, so I simply turn off the red and there is an HOO image. But it's pretty flat looking, and it's flat looking because each one of these layers on their own were flat and they weren't using the full spectrum of red, green, and blue. And in fact, if I look at a levels adjustment for, let's look at just the HA, and you can see the histogram up here. You can see that it's really kind of centered here in the from medium gray down to kind of a quarter tone of dark gray. We're not using the full range of 0 to 255. We're only using a little bit of it. So we can create more contrast in the image by using our black slider and our white slider, so that, let me turn this on, now we're taking our bright areas up to almost pure white. We're taking our dark areas down to almost pure black. If I look at it against a black background, you can see this dark area is starting to get very close to pure black. If we look at it against a white background, we can judge that our lights are starting to get pretty close to a pure white. So now we're going to get the full range of black to red and not just that little bit. And if we do the same thing with our color on green and blue, Now we get a much more vibrant, much more colorful image than we did without that. So that's without compressing or stretching each individual color channel. It's kind of a dull looking image. If we optimize each one of those channels, we get a much richer color, a much more dynamic and vibrant image. And then at that point you can turn on the stars and you're getting pretty close to a finished image. This is one of the reasons I really enjoy working in Photoshop, is because it gives me a very visual, interactive approach to adjusting these colors. In fact, if I want to fine-tune these even more, I could come, for instance, to the oxygen or the green-blue, and I could fine-tune it even more in terms of how much green and blue I want relative to the hydrogen alpha background and so forth. So you get a lot of flexibility with Photoshop, and I really like working this way. Some people do this very well with PixInsight, and that's fine too. The point I wanted to make here is that when you think in terms of bit depth and dynamic range, for the most part, those apply to how your camera is able to capture the dynamic range of the real world. How much of the range of black to white it can capture in the scene that you're photographing. Once you are working with an image, you're going to be limited to about 7 to 8 stops of dynamic range, because that's all that's available in whatever output medium you're using, whether it's a monitor or a piece of paper or an aluminum panel. They all are going to be somewhere in that 7 to 8 stop range. So the best you can do is utilize the full range of tones from almost black to almost white within your data, and that will give you the most pop, the most color, the most contrast, and give you the most dramatic, appealing image that you can get. I hope you found this useful and not too theoretical. Hope you can find a way to apply it to your astrophotography or your photography in general. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. If you like videos like this, obviously be sure to like and subscribe, and then you'll be able to see more of these. If you have any questions about remote imaging, we'd love to talk to you about that. You can contact us through our website at utahdesertremote.com. And I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.